G'day, welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to talk about the three things that all rifle shooters need to keep at the top of the pile of things to do to make them the best shooter they can be. Now, this is make the rifle the most accurate, whatever the thing you're trying to be in more accuracy. These are three things that you need to remember. Now keep in mind, this is in reference to there's a lot of other things, whether it's the loading or the ammunition or the quality of ammunition or the rifle or the barrel or the scope or all the bits and pieces, all sorts of other things where accuracy hides also. But let's go with that's a stand. Whatever that is, you're making this particular rifle, this particular platform shoot as well as you possibly can do. There are three things you still need to keep in mind. The first of is form, shooter form, how you interface with the rifle. Now this changes as to how you're shooting it. Obviously there's all sorts of different shooting form, whether that's prone, whether that's off the bench, whether that's off a tripod, whether that's kneeling, whether that's squatting, whether that's whatever it is, however you're shooting, there is a form that is going to work the best for you. Now, when it comes to I suppose one of the things that is always mentioned a lot is being comfortable, getting to where you're comfortable. And I suppose that is probably a little bit, can be misleading, because no, it's not about making you the most comfortable person and then fitting the rifle into it. It's actually about muscle memory to a degree. It's learning the right way to use something or other, becoming comfortable with that, and then when you're comfortable and relaxed in that situation, that works for you. Now there is probably a 400-page book or a 1,000-page book you could write on all the different forms that you can use. The likes of us with our prone shooting. I have a very high prone shooting position, up on my elbows, up off my chest, keeping my heartbeat and my breathing as to less relevance to the shooting, but in all the things that there's videos on our channel as to our prone shooting form. But that does not mean that is the only way, and it is certainly something that we that shoot like that are very comfortable with. And I'm using that as a reference because this can refer to whether it's your bench shooting or, like I said, of all the other the tripod shooting, all the other different forms of shooting, is that it is something that interfaces with the rifle properly. Your form can cause muzzle jump, your form can cause your rifle to move each way on recoil control, your form, how you actually hold the rifle, what muscles are tensioned up, how your body moves when the recoil comes against you. These things all need to be understood. And then with practice, you'll find that the place where it works the best is the place where you're most comfortable, where you align with your muscle memory. So form is monstrously important, and certainly if you're in a slightly awkward position or not quite the normal position you would be with the ground or the bench or whatever it is you're working with, you have to do more concentrating on it. But going back to, am I doing this right, is the first thing, that your mindset is on getting your form to the right place, is the first place to start. The next thing that we always have to remember, this is easy to forget for all of us, but it is something that is truly rarely done correctly, and that is parallax. Adjusting the parallax on your scope. That side knob on the side of the scope there, or in some cases up the front there, but the modern scope now and a tactical scope has parallax on the side, or even if you don't have, you have a fixed parallax rifle. Wherever it is, with the side knob, that isn't a focus knob. It is a parallax knob. Yes, you adjust as you adjust your parallax, you see your focus change, but the main job is the parallax. I have videos on that also, but adjusting a parallax means you get it to where you think it's right, and then you move your eye slightly around behind it. And if your crosshairs move over your target as you move your eye around, your parallax isn't correct. Maybe you need to adjust your scope, but the clarity is not as important as those crosshairs not moving. So checking your parallax is super important. Even if you've been shooting for half an hour and you think it's fine, if you've got a group that's opening up or it's a bit weird, you don't understand, double check your parallax. The parallax needs to be right. There are some scopes where they will move and you'll have a couple of shots and the parallax will be off. This is about inside the scope mechanism and it's actually moving through recoil. This actually happens. So double checking your parallax, triple checking your parallax, making sure that's right is a super important detail to having accurate shots. If your parallax is incorrect, then you can be holding the crosshairs on exactly the same spot, but the rifle's actually aiming for a different spot each time because of the parallax. This is also answered a little bit with form. There is exactly your cheek weld, exactly where your eye position is, sort of corrects that. If you're unsure about it or can't adjust it, you have a fixed parallax scope and you've got the parallax moving. If you come back to where you have a slight scope shadow, so you have the darkness come in around the outside of your vision, and you hold that in the center or to the same spot every time, then that can semi-rectify it. The parallax is, yes, the next most important thing of what you can do with your platform to make you the most accurate. And the last of the 3 steps I want to talk about is the trigger finger. Now, this is something that is very much a muscle memory thing. It's very much understanding things, but there are some basic rules. As to exactly how you grip it, exactly where you put it on the pad, pulling straight through, these things are all important to do correctly, but they're not the most important thing by any means. The most important thing you can do with your trigger squeeze is get to where you can really just squeeze through. You're not yanking the trigger. A huge mistake that some people make, especially when they're a bit anxious, end up with a bit nervous and there's a yank on the trigger. When they're doing that, all these muscles are moving. This forearm will be making the rifle flinch, and you can't notice it because there's a yank. So turn that into a squeeze should be no more than a tiny movement of just your trigger finger is very important. More important than the exact position, more important than when you're exactly pulling, it is a straight pull. The next most important thing, and the thing that I see very much got wrong by even professional shooters, is that the trigger finger is a squeeze and it stops. It's not pew pew, your finger's not coming back out. This is a habit that's learned from maybe kids when they're playing cops and robbers. It's certainly a habit forced by range safety, and certainly with semi-automatic rifles and semi-automatic handguns, is this urge to get that trigger finger outside the trigger guard, because that I'll get told off by the safety officer that's out there, is something that forces some people into this jumpy trigger finger. So actually be able to squeeze and hold. It sits straight back, it's against the backstop, it's not doing anything else until that shot's landed. I tend to suggest, and I can say that, but when I'm doing a 5-second shot or a 10-second shot with a bullet flight, my finger's off the trigger before I hit the target. The main thing I would say is really in a normal under a second bullet flight is that you just leave your finger there until you see your impact, and then you pull it off. This is also fine for semi-automatics. This is fine for everything. If it stays back there, it's fine. So the reason for that is that as you bring your finger forward, if you get to this thing where you end up with a jumpy trigger finger, there's all sorts of muscles happening through your arm. So this does cause, most noticeable in something like a 22, but in actual fact, it can be caused everywhere, is the fact that that trigger finger is just a squeeze. That's all it is. Not a squeeze and release, not a squeeze and get outside the trigger guard, but just a squeeze. Straight through, straight back down through is the ideal way. In truth, as long as it is just a squeeze, it's not going to influence the rifle. Now, as overall, there are so many more details to that, but if you always get those things right, if you double check yourself and always come back to those, and that's including the whole lot, myself, the professional shooters, the competition shooters, every single one of us makes this mistake on occasions. So as a beginning shooter or as a hunter that goes out occasionally, it's a very natural thing to get wrong. Any one of those things, the form, I'm not quite comfortable with this, but that's where the shot is. Learn to work out how to make that work for you. Form's super important. Parallax, there is more load development done. There's more rifles taken back to gun shops. There's more rifles taken back to gunsmiths because they have not set their parallax. It turns into this mysterious thing of where your crosshairs are dead on and you're getting this big group and something's wrong. And what's actually wrong is the parallax is wrong. So those crosshairs are actually in different positions all the time. Although they look the same, they're actually got the rifle pointed in a different place. So there's more work done. There's literally millions of dollars over the world of load development, of barrel replacements, of things that have actually happened, scope replacements, because the parallax wasn't set up properly and the parallax wasn't used properly. And ultimately, no matter what the problem is, if you're checking it, you're onto the fact that parallax is the issue. What's the point of pulling a trigger if you haven't got control of your parallax? And trigger control, well, that's nerves. There's all sorts of things, flinches, all sorts of stuff happens. Dry firing is the best way to fix the trigger control and get muscle memory to it. I actually dry firing with with a practiced handgun, or with a toy handgun, something that's got a proper trigger. It goes bang. It's not perfect, but learning to actually squeeze is super important for your handgun stuff, and learning to not influence the handgun when you're doing it. But it's just as relevant for your firearm, for your centerfire, for your rimfire, for your PCP, for whatever the rifle is just as important there. And the big thing that I see a lot of, there's yanking the trigger, but there's certainly a lot of getting that finger off the trigger. And that, as long as it happens afterwards, is fine, but it shouldn't be trying to jump off anyway. It should be pulling the trigger, holding it back, and then relaxed to go back to this stage. You should be in control of it. You want to be in control of your trigger finger. Anyway, that's the 3 things that every shooter can do to make them the best shooter they can be. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Thank you very much for checking in, and we'll catch you next time.